Well, senators found the president not guilty on Article 1, abuse of power, by a vote of 52-48. They also found President Trump not guilty on Article 2, obstruction of Congress, by a vote of 53-47. Those votes acquitted the president today on both charges, and it would have taken at least 67 votes to convict on either article. And with that, we want to go over to Mark now as we get some final analysis on this.
All right, Brooke, thank you very much. Perhaps no one better to join us on this landmark day in U.S. history than the Director of Political Studies at Cedarville University, Dr. Mark Caleb Smith. Mark, you've been with us throughout this journey, so glad you're with us on this final day today. Why don't we start with, I think, the highlight of the votes we just saw within the last hour. Mitt Romney crossing party lines on one of two votes, siding with the other side. Of course, he is a former Republican candidate for president. It's going to be 4 years until he has to run for re-election to the Senate if he chooses to do so. What do you make of Romney being the lone guy out there who made the move to cross over?
In some ways, it's really not a surprise at all. I mean, Mitt Romney has been relatively consistent throughout President Trump's career, even before he became president, being willing to criticize the president as a candidate, being willing to criticize him as a president himself. And so in some ways, this doesn't really surprise me whatsoever. In another way, of course, it takes a great deal of courage to step outside of the party, to be the only sitting Republican senator and the first person in history to cast a vote against a presidential impeachment in their own party. So it is rather remarkable in that sense, and it is history that we're watching.
All right, Mark, so obviously now the next question, where do we go from here as a nation? Where do these two parties go from here? Where does the president go from here? This has been a tough few weeks, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think most interesting for me is to see how the president responds to this moving forward. Back in 1999, Bill Clinton was somewhat chastened by the whole impeachment process. He apologized, he said that he would do better. And then he sort of started to move forward with a little bit different spirit, I think. I'm not sure Donald Trump will approach it that way at all. He's insisted throughout this process that everything he did was perfectly normal and perfectly legal. And so it's hard for me to think that he's going to feel restrained by what's taken place. Some people are worried that he might even feel confident in doing more than he's done in the past. I think for the parties, last night at the State of the Union address, we saw this gulf between the parties. We saw how two of the party figureheads, and President Trump and Nancy Pelosi, treated each other at the beginning and at the end of his address. The divide between the two parties is larger than it's been in quite a long time. I'm not going to overly dramatize it. We did have a civil war where the parties were pretty far apart from one another. We don't have that. But we do see a pretty big gulf, and it's just hard for me to imagine something taking place in the short term that would bring those groups together.
Mark, let me finish with you with this. Of course, over the long history of this country, the tradition has always been three co-equal branches of government. There has been some discussion in recent days that the outcome of this trial could somewhat tip that balance, giving the executive branch more power, perhaps, than it's had in the past over the legislative. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't quite go that far. I think it's fair to say that the president has grown in power over the last 100 years or so. I don't think the outcome of this impeachment trial necessarily makes the executive office or executive branch more powerful. It might make Donald Trump feel a little bit more emboldened than he has before, but I think it's exaggerating for people to say that we're moving toward a monarchy or that this will make President Trump the most powerful president in history. Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt, these were extraordinarily powerful presidents. I don't think Donald Trump is quite there yet.
All right, thank you, Dr. Mark Caleb Smith from Cedarville, very much for joining us live on this historic day. And we will continue our coverage shortly at